Oh no, I sound just like my mom. Have you ever caught yourself in the middle of a moment with your child, maybe raising your voice, maybe shutting down, and then thought, ugh, I'm doing the exact same thing that I promised I would never do? It's one of the most disorienting moments in parenthood. And it's also one of the most important ones. Because when that happens, it's not about your child. It's about the invisible family patterns that have been quietly living inside of us, inside of you all along. Hi there. If this is your first time here, welcome to the Parenthood and Relationship Podcast. I'm your host, Markella Kaplani, a psychologist, a parenthood and relationship coach, and a parent myself. Together, we explore the transformative journey of parenthood and its profound impact on our relationship with ourselves, our partners, and our children, so that we can be present and show up as we envision without having to do more. Let's get into today's episode. Last week, in episode 56, we talked about how our own childhood wounds can show up in our parenting and how these intense reactions are often echoes from the past, not evidence that we're falling short. This week, we're zooming out even further. We're looking at the legacy behind those reactions. The silent scripts, if you will, that we absorbed without even realizing it. The ones that shape how we love, how we discipline, how we handle emotions, unless we choose to change them. And here is the most hopeful part. You don't have to stay trapped in patterns that don't fit your values. You can rewrite the story, but first you have to see it. So today, we're exploring what invisible family patterns are, how to recognize when they're playing out in our parenting, and the first gentle step toward changing them without blame and without shame. And as always, I have a powerful reflection exercise for you at the end of the episode waiting inside this week's newsletter. Sign up at markellakaplani.com/newsletter. So let's make one thing clear. Family patterns aren't just habits. They're emotional survival strategies that were passed down to us, sometimes for generations. They're the unspoken rules that we learned, that you learned before we even had words. Don't talk about hard things. Good kids don't cry. Keep busy and stay useful. That is how you earn love. You can be angry, but never sad. Most of the time, no one actually sat down to say these out loud. These are the kinds of things that we learned through the air that we breathed, through how conflict was handled or avoided, through how emotions were treated. Were they welcomed? Were they punished? Were they ignored? And those lessons didn't just stay in the past. They became part of our nervous system. They became part of the voice in our heads, of our emotional reflexes, our automatic responses. But if we're going to take a step back here, then consider this. Most of these patterns weren't born out of cruelty or bad parenting. They were adaptations, survival mechanisms that were designed to help your caregivers cope with their own world, with their own wounds, the difficulties that they were facing. But just because they were necessary back then doesn't mean that they still serve you now, especially when you're trying to parent with intention and connection. Invisible family patterns are like old operating systems running quietly in the background of our lives. And when the pressure of parenting arises, which it does, when we're tired and we're triggered, when we're overwhelmed, those old scripts often step in and take over. That's not because we're bad. That's not because we don't know how to parent. It's not because we're weak, but it's because in the absence of conscious choice, which is very difficult when we're exhausted, we choose the familiar over the unknown. Automation beats thought every single time. So how do we know when it's not just a tough day? How do we know when an old family script is sneaking into our parenting? Let's discuss a few signs to watch out for. For one, you may feel emotionally hijacked in familiar ways. This means that you may be reacting more strongly to your child's independence or their anger, their sadness, their needs, especially if those emotions weren't safe in your family growing up. You might hear yourself thinking, "How dare you talk to me that way?" Or "Stop crying." And that might happen just almost automatically. Secondly, you might feel a deep conflict between your values and your reactions. You know you want to parent with calm and connection. You know you want to be respectful, but when you're stressed, you find yourself snapping, shutting down, repeating patterns that you consciously disagree with. Furthermore, another sign may be that your voice echoes the past, sometimes in your words and sometimes in your body. You might say things that you swore you never would. You might also feel things like tension and shutting down or even rage that may seem to belong to a younger version of you, not the parent that you want to be. Finally, you might find that you're carrying unexplainable guilt, shame, or fear. Even when you handle things well, you may feel like it's not enough. You may feel like you're always failing, even if you're trying your best. This often points to internalized family rules about worth, love, success. If you are noticing yourself in any of these patterns, please hear me when I say you are not doomed. We are all in this boat together. And those of us who are starting to notice, well, we're already making the first crack in the old story. Stress doesn't just make us tired. It makes us default to the familiar, even if that familiar place isn't where we want to be. When we're sleep deprived and overstimulated, when we're carrying an invisible mental load of the entire family, our brain starts to look for shortcuts. And the easiest shortcut is the old script that we grew up with. Granted, it's not the best. It doesn't match our current values. It doesn't match our goals, but it is wired in our nervous system as safe, simply because it's known. That's why you might find yourself after a hard day sounding exactly like your parents, even when you know better, even when you want better. But under pressure, we all reach for the familiar. And it's not just emotional either. This is biological. Your attachment system, meaning the blueprint that you built in childhood for what love means and safety means and what connection means, it gets activated in parenting. When your child pulls away, when your child defies you or they cry, they throw a tantrum, this could be tapping into the deepest layers of your own belonging, connection, and survival. If your childhood taught you that love was conditional, that mistakes were dangerous, or that emotions were unsafe, those lessons will try to replay themselves unless you interrupt them. And none of this makes you weird or bad or defective. It makes you human, and it makes the work of parenting and reparenting yourself incredibly brave. So, if invisible family patterns are this strong, what's the first step to changing them? Well, it's actually simpler and gentler than you might think. Step 1 is to name one rule. Pick one invisible family rule that you are finding out that you grew up with in your family. Something like keep your emotions to yourself, or it could be something along the lines of you only get attention if you achieve something. Another one that is very common is love is earned, not given. You don't have to judge it yet. You don't have to try to change it either. You just want to name it, because when you can name it, you can start to choose differently. Then it's time for step 2, which is to ask yourself, does this rule serve the parent that I want to be in the now? Maybe that rule protected you once, but does it help you build the kind of connection, the kind of safety and trust that you want with your child now? If it doesn't, you have the power to gently let it go. Oh, and an important disclaimer, this won't happen overnight, and this process isn't linear. Sometimes we expect as we begin this journey that we should have steady, persistent progress. But that's just not the case. Not for you, not for me, not for anyone. Progress comes in waves. The biggest part of progress, in fact, at least in my opinion, is being able to tolerate, or better, to see with compassion, those moments in time that you find yourself in that dip again. So, you're going to tackle this step by step, conversation by conversation, repair by repair. Moving on, step 3 is to stay curious and avoid blame. This work isn't about blaming your parents or their parents or yourself or the circumstances that brought your family where it is at now. It's about understanding the bigger story so that you can write a new chapter. Most likely, your parents and your grandparents, they were just repeating the patterns that they learned as well. When you approach this work with curiosity, you create space. Space for growth, space for grace, space for something better. If you want to take this exploration deeper, and I really hope you do, I've created a simple reflection that you can work through this week. Here is your journaling invitation. As I mentioned before, it is vital that you consider this question. What was one unspoken rule in my family growing up? Moreover, how could that rule still be shaping how I parent today, consciously or unconsciously? And for those of you who feel ready to start exploring the alternatives, you can ask yourself and journal on this one last question. What new belief or value do I want to model for my children instead? You can find the full guided reflection and a valuable tool to help you in your process inside this week's newsletter. It's free and it's there to support you. Sign up at markellacaplani.com/newsletter or click the link in the show notes. Because noticing the pattern is powerful, naming it is revolutionary, and choosing something different, that's how we break cycles. And that is how we build something new. If you felt that today stirred something inside of you, if you recognized an old script that is quietly playing out in the background, I want you to know that you're not trapped. You are exactly where change begins. Next week, we'll be moving from reflection to healing action. In episode 58, we'll talk about how we can heal ourselves while we are raising our kids. Small, daily shifts that can help us care for our inner child without waiting for perfection or for the right timing to go to therapy, because that will never come. Healing doesn't have to be another thing on our to-do list. It can be a way of being, gentle, imperfect, transformational. Oh, and if this episode resonated with you, and if you want to support my show, please share it on your socials, talk about it with your friends, tell everyone your takeaways, comment below, and leave me a review on Apple Podcasts. I have a link in the show notes that you can find, and it will really mean the world to me because it helps more parents and couples find their way here. Until next time, remember, you are already an amazing parent. Take care of yourself, and I'll see you next Sunday. Bye-bye.